Also Cape Fear River, yes. All these waterways and ecosystems and forests and mountains that are the reason that we're gathering today to think about ways to protect these other beings as well. Finger Lakes, yeah, beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Chatham County, New York. Cape Fear River, yes, the Delaware River. Beautiful. All right, so let's take a moment before we jump into the rights of nature. I'd love to take a moment with you all just to really just ground ourselves. So we're just oriented to where in the world are we? And wherever in the world you are, you're here now in this body. So put your feet on the ground, whatever way you can. Put your feet on the ground. And if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, up to you. Maybe just lower your gaze. You can turn your video off if you want to. But just tap into your breath. Take a big, deep breath in and send it all the way down to your feet. Let it go all the way down into the planet. And let it go. And this time as you breathe in, bring it up from the planet, up through your feet, up through your legs, into your body, and out through your mouth. One more deep breath. Feel your feet on the ground, feel your connection to the earth, and be aware of your gratitude that you have for this planet, for her holding us, for her giving us water and air and food and medicine and animals and other humans and all the gifts that we have. I'm particularly feeling grateful for all these humans here with us today, looking at other ways to protect our planet. So just generate that sense of gratitude inside you. And let's step into this work together today, grounded on the earth and grateful that we're here and we get to be here today together. So I just want to introduce myself and Susanna here with me. My name is Kat. I am actually Kat. I'm not just wrongly named on Zoom. That is my name. And Susanna and I are part of an organization here in Asheville, North Carolina called Community Roots. We're a nonprofit, we're volunteer led, we're women led, and we focus on community rights and the rights of nature. And community rights is essentially creating rights for local communities. So helping cities and counties be able to make decisions about the places that they live instead of corporations and states making those decisions, which is a long journey that we're on. We created this organization in 2017 in response to our experiences at Standing Rock, and came home and started asking questions about how do we make the just and equitable transition to renewable energy here in Asheville. And that sent us on a journey that is ongoing. And through part of that journey, we got to understanding the rights of nature and working to bring rights of nature legislation to Asheville, which I'm going to tell you more about today. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview. I'm going to give you an overview of our agenda today and the things that I'm planning to cover. And there's a lot of time built into this afternoon's workshop to get your questions answered, to figure out what's going on in your city, your county, so that we can really address how do you bring this to wherever you are, because it's different depending on where you live. So there's a lot of time and space built in for us to do that. So as I start to go over the agenda, I would love for it if you could post into the chat any questions you already have, or your intention essentially. Why are you here? What are you hoping to get from this? So that, and Susanna can feed those to me, so make sure that we cover that as best that we can. I want you to know that I am not a lawyer. I am a psychologist. So I'm coming at this. I have worked with a lot of lawyers on the rights of nature and have a basic understanding of the legal aspects of it. But I'm coming at it from a position of a psychologist. And how do the rights of nature laws force us to change our perception, force us to change our thinking about ourselves as a species and how we fit into the greater natural community? So there will be a focus on that piece of it, and also the very practical legal, how do you get this actually enacted in your city or town? So yeah, please send in any questions that you have through the chat. And I'll give you a brief overview of the agenda, and then I'm going to talk for a little while, and then we're going to break out. We'll take a break also in there. So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about how I got involved in the rights of nature and how Community Roots is working on that. I'm going to talk to you about my trip into the Amazon to work with the Sariaku people there, who have been leaders for decades in this movement. And we're going to hear some video from some of the people that we met in Sariaku, and because they can explain their concept. It's called Kausak Sacha, which means the living forest. Their worldview that totally makes sense, totally makes rights of nature make sense, and upends a lot of assumptions that we have in the West about our legal system and our role as activists as well. I'll give you a little overview of the rights of nature movement globally, what's happening in other countries and what's happening in the US. And then we'll focus in a bit more on what we're doing in Asheville and our work with CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, who have been instrumental in bringing rights of nature work to many different countries, but are based here in the US. And then we're going to get more deeply into how do you implement this, right? So the theory is great. And the understanding of what other people are doing is nice to have, but what does it mean for your lakes, your rivers, your forests, your mountains? Okay, and I think coming up in the chat, Susanna, that needs to be addressed now.
Not yet, just one more reminder to rename and that we are recording if you did not, if you joined us a little later, so welcome.
All right, okay, I'm gonna jump in to the rights of nature. I'm trying to give you some sense of how I got here. It's a very long and winding journey. But as I mentioned, we started doing this work when we got back from Standing Rock in 2016. And it was actually started by an article in Yes magazine. It was this exact article that came out in actually 2015. And our co-founder, his name was Tyler Garrison, saw this article, read this article about the Sariaku people in Ecuador. This is Nina Guyalinga, who I later met. He read this article about what they were doing and dug deep into it, and through that found CELDEF, the organization we work with, who I'll tell you more about, and got really inspired about this idea that there's a giving ecosystems legal standing and giving them rights in what they can do, and so that we can defend them in court. So it was this article that sparked that for Tyler, and we went sort of down this rabbit hole of trying to understand what was the work that the Sariaku people were doing and how could we bring that to Asheville. So he unfortunately was killed in a motorcycle accident in 2018. So we only just scratched the surface of this work by the time he left us. But he and I were scheduled to go to Ecuador a month after he ended up dying. So in March of 2018, I got on a plane anyway, and I went to Ecuador to try and find them. That was a project in itself, finding the Sariaku people. They are deep in the Amazon, and to thank them for their work and for their inspiration, and to learn from them. And there's a video that I want to share with you that I got on that trip. But this is where it started, from this Yes magazine article. This is me going down the river. So when I say it's deep down in the Amazon, I'm not kidding. It was, you go out of Quito, it's like a 4 or 5 hour car ride to this place called Puyo, which is on the kind of border of the Andes and the Amazon. And then from there, we took an 1.5 hour Jeep ride on a very, very muddy road to get to the place where you got the canoe, which was essentially a shack on the side of the river. And then we got in the canoe, and what you can't see from this picture is that there are probably at least 7 holes in this canoe. The guy behind me had a machete and some plastic bags, and he just kept stuffing plastic bags into the holes so that we didn't sink. And it worked. It was a 2.5 hour boat ride, but we got there and it worked. We didn't sink, and it was really a fun, beautiful ride. These are a few pictures that we took along the way. And when we got there to Sariaku, We got there on a Friday afternoon and realized that they were hosting a international conference that weekend, which I had no idea about. I had no idea how I was even going to get there. And then when I got there, I found that they were hosting this international conference on the rights of nature and on Kawasaki, which I'm going to have one of them explain to you, which is essentially their worldview, their understanding of the forest as a living being and humans as part of that living being. And so here's some of the, on the right here is some parts of the village. And on the left here are some of the kids who were in the conference. They did a performance at the beginning of the conference. I don't know how many of you read Spanish, but this says "Defend the Forest" on his stomach there. These are some of the girls that were there with us. So I'm going to bring up, I'm going to bring up Jose Guialinga, who was the former chief of the Sariaku at the time that I got there, one of their elders, who is very much deeply involved with this proposal that they have called Kawasaki. So their native language is called Quechua, and Kawasaki means the living forest, la selva viva in Spanish. So he talked to us. I'm not going to show you the whole video, but we do have that and can share that with you later. But I'm going to show you the first couple of minutes where I asked him to provide us a brief overview of this proposal that they were making at this international conference they were hosting in their village. And there was people there from, I think, about 10 different countries, various different climate activists that had come. It was all being held in Spanish, which is their second language. They speak Quechua as their native language, but it was all held in Spanish, which is like, I can't even basically order a meal in Spanish. So I had to have a translator help me with it. So I'm going to play the first couple of minutes of this video. This is Jose Guialinga, and I asked him if he could give us a brief overview of the proposal.
Sí, bueno, causa es todo con nosotros. Es un sistema, una forma de vida, de vivencia del pueblo Sarayaco y de otros pueblos indígenas. Siempre ha existido. Y ahí viven pueblos, son pueblos, igual que nosotros. En las lagunas también hay seres igual que nosotros y tienen un comportamiento social. Y esa era la educación primordial de los indígenas para respetarnos. No puedes usar el bosque, la tierra, los animales sin ese pensamiento. Sí. Nuestros padres nos educaron a respetar eso. Ahí está la mazanga del ser que regula el equilibrio del ecosistema, y a ese ser hay que respetar. Y si vas a cazar un animal, hay que pedir una bendición de esa persona, porque nosotros no somos los dueños, ellos son los dueños. Entonces, ese es Kawasaki. Así era nuestra educación y es en la actualidad, pero no, eso ha vivido en la mente, en el interior de cada persona de Sarayaco. Sin embargo, no ha podido pasar más allá.
I think my computer is catching up, hopefully. Okay. Okay, let me see if I can get the end of that. We're about 30 seconds from the end. Let me see if I can get it to play. Okay, I think we're there.
Las escuelas y los colegios. Esta forma de vivir, este equilibrio empieza a romperse. La juventud ya no empieza a sentir que esa montaña es viva. Ahí hay pueblos. Entonces se vuelve un simple naturaleza. Ese es un peligro grave, enorme para nosotros.
I think the subtitles were blocked there on the last little part, were they? Yeah. But you got to see the first little part. I'd like to pause there and just hear some reactions to what you did here. It's hard because his first language is Quechua. He's speaking in Spanish. It's then being translated into English. So it can be hard to sort of to grasp. But I'd love to just hear some reflections of what you heard Jose say, or thoughts or comments on that. Feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
This is Denise from Chapel Hill.
Hey.
So the indigenous people and cultures look at nature look at themselves as being part of nature, not apart from nature. And in my mind, it's the Western culture and philosophy that has the unfortunately predominant view that mankind is conqueror of nature and we're apart from nature. But I just love the indigenous people's respect for nature and attitudes, and just, you know, keeping the entire ecosystem in mind. Again, human beings are part of nature in their viewpoints, and it's just wonderful to see.
Yes, thank you, Denise. Exactly, yeah, and Jose even talked about respect and how they were taught, their elders taught them to respect the natural world and to ask permission, like if they were going to go and hunt, to ask permission or gather some kind of plant, which is very, very different from the way that certainly I was raised, and the way that our corporations treat the natural world.
Hi, this is Dawn, and I just want to say that I'm half Mexican, and so that side of our family, we did believe that, you know, this is a gift that we were given, but you know, we've been westernized since my great grandparents, but I think as a generation, we're going back to appreciating our planet, even if it's because we were forced to, because we did so much wreckage to it. But I just have hopes that we are going back to the traditional way of using the planet, working with the planet, and just not destroying the planet. And I hope that the Western culture will be able to embrace that.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn.
Hey, this is Michelle in Asheville. Hi, Kat.
Hey, Michelle.
Hey, everybody. So the thing that, stood out for me was the reference, and I know this was a translation, but still the reference was to personhood. And from a policy standpoint, from a writing up of charters, agreements, documents of policy, of governance, this idea of who and what is a person is key,
right? Because
that I think is a real leverage point for, it's a consciousness change, but actually it's at a policy level, it's almost one of those things that could come from that direction of policy to change consciousness, which can sometimes happen. Like all are created equal. Didn't start out there in the beginning, but it's still a consciousness that, you know, is held, that wasn't held when it was first written down. So I just think that's that was for me very pointed.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to get into personhood, specifically corporate personhood. And you're exactly right. I'm fascinated by that intersection of policy and our consciousness, our awareness as humans.
We lost you a little there, Kat. She'll be back in a second.
I wanted to add from our speaker, he was just on the topic of personhood, he was talking about the social nature, the social personality and aliveness of each lake and each forest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the kitty says hi.
Excellent. I've gotten a handful of questions about if that recording will be available again. And yeah, our goal is to have that video be available, and we are recording this particular webinar so that this whole piece would be available again as well. So if there's something that you're trying to remember at a later moment, you'll be able to hop back in and kind of watch that little section again. So yeah, I think that as you're seeing from that little clip and some of the comments that have been shared either in the chat or by attendees here, it's just such a rich way of realigning our thinking. It's, some people call it radical, and Kat and I both feel like it's not a radical thing to go back to an ancient way of being. It's actually a re-remembering and a reinvesting in all things being sacred. And when we've got the tools that we have currently, we get to really try some different things. So it's a really, really honored to have so many people that are interested in how this could look and be. Kat is just doing a technical thing. She's texting with me behind the scenes, so she's gonna actually just restart her computer. So just an update there. So for a tech moment, I will just invite all of you that have come in since we've started. Welcome. There's 61 folks with us now, so thank you. There are multiple Kat Houghtons that are not actually her. So if you wanted to rename still, we invite you to do that. And we are recording. So yeah, I will try to get this up in some way, shape, or form. It'll be available either through social media or on our website after the fact. But thanks again for carving out space to put your mind and hearts towards this work with us today. Let's see, wondering if I should move on. Yeah, Callie, go ahead.
Well, I'm Callie and I live in Asheville and am a native of this beautiful place and left for 30 years. And when I came back, I thought, oh, well, I'm coming home to this tree hugging, beautiful world where, everybody is going to make sure that they really take care of this earth here. And it's been a real wake up call, and it's been a real challenge to witness what our elected officials pass every day that is so catastrophic environmentally. And I just love the work that Dawn's doing with Greenworks, because she's trying to plant trees. It feels like a constant struggle climbing up a waterfall. And it just seems so, it's so difficult to sort of grasp the disconnect that officials have with what is so incredibly important. It's like, this isn't a game anymore. What is it going to take? And I think for me, I keep coming back to, what is it internally? I mean, I grew up here, so I was in nature every minute of my life. And so it's extremely important to me, but not everybody has this. Not everybody is raised with this. And so what is the process to help people get back to a place, because I find myself always reacting to these things, and I don't want to be reactionary. I keep thinking, we got to build the mycelium of our connection to all things in a way that is so that is somehow missing out when it comes to decision making, because it seems like every decision is about greed and not about the future of this planet. So it's so beautiful to witness communities in the world who are about education and connectivity and respect for all things. And I just feel like we white folks have so much to learn in this, and I don't exactly know how to do it, but it's very frustrating. So I'm just very excited about giving nature a voice, a legal voice.
Well, thank you, Callie. Kat is back with us. Thank you for that, Callie. So glad. And Kat, back to you.
Thank you. Ryan, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to add one more thing before we go on?
Yeah, this is Ryan from Asheville as well. And I'd just like to add that I'm really grateful that there are so many people in this conversation here right now. I think that in and of itself says a lot about the next steps forward. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that care and want to spend time and energy speaking on behalf of nature and trying to support this environment. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that's on this call and that's a part of this process. So, yeah.
All right, my computer seemed to have some issues with me playing a video through PowerPoint and all the things, and it crashed, but we're back. So I want to move into the next part. So I'm hearing what people are talking about our consciousness and how we see ourselves as humans as part of the natural world. And we're going to talk about our assumptions, but I want to start with the assumptions, 3 key assumptions of our legal system that are relevant to this work. There are many assumptions that our legal system makes, but these are 3 that are really important in terms of the rights of nature work. So the first is that only humans are sentient, and this is not actually an assumption of our legal system, this is an assumption of our science. And our whole materialism for the last 400 or 500 years has been based on this idea that only things that you can measure are actually real, which means that our consciousness is not real, our dreams, our fears, our hopes are not real. None of that's real in terms of science. When you get down to the actual basic assumptions of our scientific worldview, and that only humans are sentient, and that other animals or plants or rocks or rivers don't have any kind of consciousness or intelligence. Now, obviously, that's been challenged many, many times, and there are parts of the scientific community that are coming out and basically saying other beings have sentience as well. And I believe in New Zealand there was a law passed, I think it was last year, basically declaring that other species have sentience and that there are intelligences other than human intelligence that need to be recognized by our worldview, essentially. But that's a huge piece of it, and I'm hearing in what you're saying that that's already really aware of that. The second one here, non-humans are property, often called nature is property, is a massive assumption of our legal system that often it doesn't occur to us to question. That we have in this culture, and I'm going to give a little bit of the history of how we got here, but in Western, and I'm including Western Europe and the US, North America, certainly Canada in this, that we are just completely assumed that the natural world can be human property, that it doesn't have rights on its own accord, that it is just there for us to decide what to do with, and that we could even own a piece of land, that we write a piece of paper and we get it from another human and it says, okay, this piece of land is yours. And it gives you the right to do pretty much whatever you want on that piece of land and to the other beings that inhabit that piece of land. And this is deep, deep in our psyches and in our legal system. I think I saw in the chat there, someone had mentioned common law happened about the 1500s in England. So it used to be that in the UK and in pretty much everywhere else in the world, there was common land. So this is how the Suriyaku people live now. There's no individual ownership. So they as a people have a territory within Ecuador that they've had to fight to carve out and maintain as this is our territory, is some number of hectares. It's a huge amount of rainforest essentially for them. But it used to be that in Europe, we lived like that too. And it used to be that here in North America, the indigenous peoples here in North America lived in a very similar way, that there was different nations that had their territory, but within that, no one person owned this piece of land and the other person owned this piece of land. It was all held in common for that nation. So in the UK, which is where I'm from England and Scotland, in about the 1500s, there started to be this change from the commons where people would literally just amongst themselves figure out, okay, where do our sheep go? They'd have a common herd of sheep. They'd plant different crops. They'd make fences and hedges and walls to keep the sheep away from the crops. But it wasn't about delineating, this is mine and this is yours. It was understood that the land was shared as a shared resource. And then around about the 1500s, there was this, basically the wealthy saw an opportunity to profit from the woolen industry, which was booming at that time. And so the English government started giving pieces of land to noblemen, and they were men. And it was called the enclosure movement. And so they started basically fencing off huge areas of land and saying, okay, now this belongs to this nobleman, and he owns all of the land here. And anybody who was previously living on that land was forced to either leave or was forced into indentured servitude. They became a serf. They could continue to live on that land, but now they were working for the lord of the manor, and they just tended the sheep and tended the crops. They didn't have any stake in ownership stake in the land. A lot of those peasants that were thrown off the land during that time, and this went on for like 300 or 400 years, ended up on ships and coming over to colonize North America. But with them, they bought this whole concept of private land ownership, and this entire country was obviously founded on that concept that you could come over and take land from the people that already lived here and then divide it up and own it and create pieces of paper and laws around it to say that we own it. So that's a huge rabbit hole. So I'm not going to go down. But that is another assumption that we all have. And often when I bring this up to people, and I certainly remember for myself, being like, oh, it hadn't even occurred to me to question that we could own a piece of land. And what does it mean to own a piece of land? Does it mean that I own the living being? Do I own this tree? Is it my tree? Can I do whatever I want to it? Can I cut it down if I feel like it? What does it mean to own a piece of land? The third assumption that's really important here, and we alluded to this earlier, is that corporations have the same rights as people, which may seem counterintuitive when you hear it. You're like, no, they don't, they shouldn't. What are you talking about? But in actual fact, they do. When you start looking at how the law works, corporations have the same rights and or more rights, and oftentimes than individual people do. Again, this is we could do a whole afternoon on corporate personhood. But essentially, the thing to understand is that over the last 200 years in this country, corporations, through a series of lawsuits that started in about the 1880s, with a railroad company, a lawsuit in California, I think it was Sonoma County, against the railroad company, that corporations have started pleading that they have rights under the Bill of Rights. So they have gone to court and said, we should have the same rights as individual people. So that the example in Sonoma County, I think it was Sonoma County, with the railroad company, was that the town had decided to tax the railroad company more than they were taxing individual people, because the railroad company were causing fires and they were killing cattle, and they were kind of just causing a massive amount of destruction whenever they went through a town. So the town decided to charge them more taxes. The railroad company took the town to court and said, this is under the 14th Amendment, I think it was, or was it the 13th? It was the 13th Amendment, no, 14th, which says basically that everyone should have equal protections under the law. And so they claimed that their corporation should have equal protections and should have to only pay the same amount of taxes that individual people were paying. And they won. And that set a precedent. And since then, there's a whole list of these kinds of court cases where corporations have been given rights under the 14th Amendment, the 13th Amendment, the 5th, the 6th, the 1st, given all these rights that were originally outlined for people. So that's a huge problem in this country, because it's corporations that are doing most of the destruction. Like, we're not talking about, you own a couple of acres of land and you trim the trees now and again. We're talking about corporations that own massive amounts of land and are polluting entire ecosystems, destroying entire ecosystems. I see a couple of hands up. I'm going to move on and just do one more, and then I'll take some questions. So along with the assumptions of our legal system that have to be addressed when we think about rights of nature, also the assumptions that we as activists make. And these have come from many years of making assumptions and realizing that they don't work. This is a photo of a floating protest that we did when we came back from Standing Rock around at Duke Energy here down in Asheville around moving to renewable energy. So I'm pointing out these assumptions from our own experience. So one of them is this idea that if we can just convince our elected officials that this is wrong, then everything will change. And often and that's how we started, was like, okay, we just need to convince the Asheville City Councilors that Duke Energy shouldn't have a monopoly, and we should be able to choose, we should be, as a city, be able to choose what kind of energy we want, and we want renewable energy. Right? So we just have to convince them that that's true. That turned out to not be the case. A lot of them agreed that that was indeed would be the right way to go, but they don't have the power to change it. And essentially, as we came, and Tyler did a lot of this work, went and sat with our city councillors and asked them, well, why are we not doing this? Why are we not moving towards renewable energy? Why do we have this monopoly from this massive fossil fuel company that we can't get out from? And essentially the answer always came to, we don't have the power to change it, the state decides that. So this is a huge assumption that we make, and I think as activists we spend a lot of time focusing on, okay, we just show up at the council meetings, we've got to convince them that this is the right way to go, when in actual fact they're not the people that have the power to change this. The second assumption that I certainly have bought into is that environmental regulation laws are there to protect the natural world, because that's what we're told they're there for. In fact, they're not. They're there to limit harm, for sure, but that's not the same as protecting the natural world. They're there to tell a corporation, you can pollute to this level, this many milligrams or whatever, however they measure it, of carbon you can put out into the atmosphere, or this many tons of coal ash you can dump into a watershed, but you can't do more than that. So that the environmental regulation laws are there to limit the amount of damage that can be done, but they're not actually there to prevent damage. Or imagine this, imagine if we had laws that were actually there to assist our ecosystems in flourishing and thriving and growing more vibrant and more fertile and abundant. That doesn't even fit into the environmental regulation laws. They're there to reduce the amount of harm that can be done. The third one that we bumped into pretty early on is this idea that, well, we can't write laws, government does that, which is also not true. Many of our laws are written by corporations. They spend millions and millions of dollars on lobbying, and there are groups set up for corporations to go and basically pay people to write laws and then lobby to get them passed, whether it's at the state or the federal level. And then we as activists often think, well, we don't have any power over that, which ultimately is the case, that we don't, but that we don't because we don't know that we do, if that makes sense. And we're going to get into, as we get into the work we've been doing in here in Asheville, how we can actually change laws, and we can change local laws so that we can move towards the kind of world that we want to move towards. Okay, I'm going to pause for breath here because I see a bunch of different hands up. There's somebody on the phone with a phone number that ends in 0822. I see your hand up. If you want to unmute, I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, my name is Ian Tran. I might be on Zoom as well, but it's freezing up. But I'm from the Great Lakes region of the U.S., and so there are a lot of First Nations. There's also I think the city of Toledo, they had granted personhood, I guess, to Lake Erie, and then also we have Canada and the U.S. And so I was curious if how does like a particular entity like a municipal or even like a sovereign First Nation, stand when they grant something to, like, I think the White Earth Band of Ojibwe had granted personhood to Rice, and then also like are you stuck with like common law type stuff like tort law, or are there other pathways as well beyond common approaches for environmental law in terms of those rights?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to get into that. So I'm going to give you the very brief answer, which is yes, there's definitely ways for us to write our own laws and then get them enacted. And it's going to be different depending on what state you're in. Typically, there's two ways that we've seen in Asheville, and I'd love to hear from people in other counties, but essentially there is one route of like convincing your city councilors to pass an ordinance to actually make change, and the other route is a citizen-led ballot initiative, and I'm going to get deeper into those when we get more into what we've been doing in Asheville, and I'll address that more fully.
You could
Any other like questions?
you could also run for office.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. After the webinar.
Any other questions right now before I move on? Okay. Great. All right. So I want to just do a brief overview, very brief overview of the rights of nature movement. I'm not going to spend too much time because this information is sort of out there. But this slide gives you some of the countries. Actually, there was another one, Canada. It should be on that list. They just added there, even just like a month ago, I think. But these are some countries that have rights of nature laws, whether at the national level or at some like a lower state or county level. I'm just going to give you a quick world tour, very quick. So Ecuador, as I said, they wrote the rights of nature into their national constitution in 2009, and the Seriaku worked on that. CELDEF, which I'm going to tell you about, the organization here worked with them on that. And now in Ecuador, there are people, citizens, individuals, nonprofits, NGOs bringing lawsuits against corporate polluters in Ecuador on the basis of rights of nature. So basically saying that this ecosystem has a right to survive and to thrive beyond its use for humans. And bringing lawsuits that are requesting that corporation cease or at least reduce whatever activities it's doing that are seen to be damaging. And some of them have won. So corporations have been stopped. They're not allowed to be extracting oil or dumping things or whatever it is that they were doing because the court has said this ecosystem has a right to survive and to thrive, and this activity is not helping in that, so it has to stop. So that was one of the first places that it started. Bolivia have done something similar. They wrote a universal declaration for the rights of nature, which is a beautiful read. You can find it on the website. Colombia have taken the entire section of the Amazon rainforest that is within the country of Colombia, and that whole ecosystem has rights. New Zealand, which I talked about in my TED talk, for those of you who've seen, the Wanganui River was given rights, and that was done primarily by the Maori people there, the indigenous people to New Zealand, who fought long and hard for that to happen. And now the river has rights, and so there's a lot of restrictions about what you can build or what you can do within the watershed of the Wanganui River. Similar, the Ganges River, which is a very sacred river and also a very highly functional river in India. It feeds and waters many, many people, has got rights. Sweden has done some of this work. The UK also has done some of this work, and in the US, which I'm going to move on to. So someone I think mentioned Lake Erie. Yeah, you just mentioned Lake Erie. So like CELDEF, the organization that we work with, worked with the citizens of Toledo, Ohio, to pass this rights of nature bill, which I think passed in 2019. So this was a local, at the city of the Toledo city level, they passed this ordinance essentially that gave rights to the lake. And this is a picture of Lake Erie. You can see why they wanted to do this. It's just filthy. There's so much pollution in there, and the fish were dying, and you can't swim in it, you can't drink from it. It was really getting in a bad state. So they passed this law, and I say that very lightly, they just passed this law. It was many years of a lot of organizing to get to the point where they got this thing on the ballot and they got it passed. And it did pass in 2019, and I believe was in place for a number of months, maybe 8 or 9 months. And then in March of 2020, a court came and overturned it. They said that it was an overreach of the city's jurisdiction, that they didn't have the authority to do that, and something about there being vague language in there that they came up with. So it has been overturned. There are still other places though where it stands. So CELDF have been working in Grant Township, which is a tiny little town. I think there's about 3,000 people in rural Pennsylvania, on an anti-fracking waste bill. So there was a company that wanted to bring in fracking waste from other parts of Pennsylvania and dump that into Grant Township. They want to inject it into the water table in Grant Township, essentially. And the citizens said, absolutely not. They got together and they wrote with CELDF a community bill of rights, which included the rights of nature and included also basically that the town could make that decision independent of the state, which is not currently the state law in Pennsylvania. They got that bill enacted in Grant Township. They were immediately sued by the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania, and by the corporation that were trying to do this. They went through, I think, 5 years of lawsuits, just ongoing legal battles. Throughout the whole time, that Bill of Rights, that ordinance that they had passed was in place. It was legally, it was law in their town. So this company could not come in and dump any of their fracking water there. And just last year, in 2020, in a big turnaround, because the courts originally had been on the side of the DEP, but in a big turnaround came back and allowed it, basically said they revoked the permit they had originally given to that corporation, not allowing them anymore to go in and dump fracking waste, and basically cited the charter of the town, saying in accordance with the charter of the town, this is illegal, you can't do this, which was a huge win for that town. This is a tiny town. I think their tax revenue annually is like $32,000. That's how much they collect in taxes. It's such a small town. And CELDF represented them throughout that entire court case for 5 years. So that was a huge win. And that's one of the places in the US that the rights of nature have been established, as well as these community rights laws. So I'm gonna just give you one more piece, and then I'll pause and we'll have questions and then take a break. But this I've mentioned already, this organization, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, that we started working with in 2017, and have been hugely, hugely helpful in this work. They wrote our Bill of Rights for Asheville, which is essentially an ordinance. So that's typically, they've done about 200 of these throughout the US. And that's typically the legal vehicle that's used. So it's a local ordinance. So if you know anything about how your town or city or county works, I'm sure you know that there are various different ordinances that are passed, like a noise ordinance, things like that. So it's just a plain old ordinance that can be passed in the city. But what it does is it gives rights to either to ecosystems and/or it gives rights to the community to make decisions that they otherwise wouldn't be able to make. So here in North Carolina, the state typically will preempt any city or county decisions, which essentially means that the state gets to decide, and the city and county don't have any say. I know my dogs are going off at something. I'm going to move, so hopefully you can't hear them all. So CELDF work with cities and counties to create these Bill of Rights, these ordinances, which can then get passed, and we're going to talk about how to do that, and then can essentially go up against state laws and establish sort of a little enclave, whether it's the city or the county, where the citizens are getting to make those decisions. The state doesn't get to make those decisions, which is very problematic for the state. They tend to not like it, tend to come after the city that's made it, but not always. So for instance, in Pittsburgh, I think this was 2010, CELDF worked with a group in Pittsburgh, again, this was sort of during the fracking boom, to ban fracking within the city limits of Pittsburgh. And it took them, I think it took them 7 months of them. They had a huge force of people, just citizens, that would show up at the city council meetings and demand that they ban fracking. And they wrote this whole Bill of Rights, which is essentially just a city ordinance. And with enough public pressure and them showing up over and over again at the city council meetings, they got the thing passed. They got unanimously all nine of the city councillors to vote yes and to pass it. And it went into law. And that was it. Nothing, then that was it. Fracking was banned. They totally won. There was no pushback from the state. There was no pushback from the company. And that's, I believe it's still in place in Pittsburgh. Then you contrast that with Grant Township, which is a very small, tiny town that I'm sure the DEP thought they could push over very easily, and they had to fight for 5 years to get their ordinance to be accepted by the state. But it is, now it is. So it depends on where you are and what your situation is as to how that's going to go. But I'll tell you a little bit about Asheville and what we found and our approach here. So we did find that there's two ways in North Carolina for us to do this. One is to convince our city councilors to pass it, sort of similar to what they did in Pittsburgh, which is definitely an option for us. The second option is to do a citizen-led ballot initiative, which means that if we can get a petition with enough signatures, a certain percentage of the signatures from registered voters in the city, then we can get the ordinance on the ballot in the next city election, and then people can vote on it. And if it's passed, then it's passed. It goes into law. The difference obviously in the strategies and how you make each of those different things happen. But the key difference for us was that if we took the first route of just convincing the city councilors, then they could rewrite the bill. They could change it in whatever way they wanted, and we would have no control over that. So they could pass a very watered down version of it. With the second route, with the citizen-led ballot initiative, it specifically says in our city charter that anything that's passed cannot be changed, and it becomes law as soon as it's voted on by the people. So that was our reason for going in that direction. And so that's what we're doing here in Asheville is a citizen-led ballot initiative to get the Bill of Rights that CELDF has written with us onto the ballot and voted on. Okay, I'm going to pause again. And see if there are any questions. Susanna, is there anything that's come up in the chat?
There's a pretty big slew of comments, questions from the whole thing that I've been collecting. So if you want to see if there's any hands currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Callie.
Why are we waiting until July to start getting signatures? I know you haven't gone over that yet, but why can we not just massively try and do this and get this passed by council like by July, so that we can maybe have things like the Bluffs at River Bend not passed because the river would have a legal standing?
Yeah. Because there's a bunch of protocols that we have to follow. So in Asheville, and I can't speak for other cities, but in Asheville, in order to do a citizen-led ballot initiative, they have like a protocol that you have to follow. So the next city election is November 2020. So that's when it could go on the ballot. They won't call a special election for it. So we have to wait for that next election. And then, but they need 90 days before the election. So that brings us to like August in order to, process it and get it on the ballot. And then you have a year to collect the signatures. So basically we have to then backdate another year, and then that's where we start. So that's why July of this year is our starting point for that campaign. We don't want to start the clock too soon. Basically, we want to give ourselves as much prep time as possible, knowing that we'll have 1 year to collect the required amount of signatures, and then that will end, and we won't be able to put in any more signatures. And then it will take the Board of Elections 90 days to process it and get it on the ballot.
And another key piece of it is that, at least in Asheville, we can't have it be electronic. It has to be pen on paper. Mm-hmm. And so having all that Kat was saying about the timing, and then trying to specifically now plan as well around making it as COVID friendly as possible for both our canvassers for outdoor collection of signatures. So there's so many little details that put us to this specific timeline.
Do we know how many signatures we need? And it has to be Asheville citizen residents, right? Asheville tax-paying residents. It can't be Buncombe County. Is that right?
Yeah, for Asheville, it has to be Asheville. It's 15%, which last time worked out at like 10,358 signatures. So I don't know for this year what it will be.
Okay.
I'd love to hear from people in other states, other cities, if you have specific questions, if you think about how would I do this at home, and that's what we're going to get into after the break. But if there's anything specific right now, I'd love to hear it. Okay. There's some really good stuff in the chat, so I encourage you to take a moment. I'm like looking at all these comments, and we'll definitely save this and we can send it to you because I know there's some links and things in there. But maybe let's take a 5-minute break. Move your bodies, drink some water, stretch. Remember that you have a body. You're not just a little head in a box looking at a computer. Maybe go outside, look at the beauty that surrounds us. I've got 4:03 right now, so let's come back at 4:08, and I'll see you all then. All right, welcome back. I know we lost a couple of people. I said in the chat they have to go do some other things, but there's still a bunch of us here. So we get to kind of dive a little bit deeper into this. I mean, my intention here is hopefully, if we can, to seed some other rights of nature projects around either the state or around the country and offer whatever support we can in doing that. Susanna's excited about that idea. And I realize, you know, everyone's in a different situation in terms of where they are in this journey. Some of you are just maybe just learning, just sort of gathering information. Others maybe more further down the path. And I realize that we're all in different states and we have different laws and different processes to go through. So there's a few different ways that we can do this, that we can split up into breakout rooms. So that's the idea, is that we're going to split out and have so we can have deeper discussions in smaller groups, and then we'll come back and sort of report back to the full group. So we could, like, a few thoughts. Yeah.
Before we move, there are 2 questions, hands up questions, if you want to take those
Please.
first.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I see someone with it's the same person, the phone number 0822.
Ian?
You're still on mute, Ian. There you go.
Okay. I could probably ask it later if there's time later, just to see. It was kind of on what happens if it's like an international thing or if it affects all of the Great Lakes kind of a thing. And then you have all these different, I guess, parties or sovereignties involved. But.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's the answer, is that there'd have to be a collaboration between all those different jurisdictions, basically. But Toledo did pass that thing for Lake Erie, and I know that obviously Toledo is not the only city that's involved in Lake Erie, so that might, but then that was overturned because the judge said, well, you're overstepping your reach as a city. So it may have gone different had there been other jurisdictions around the lake that were involved. Yeah.
Okay.
Ryan, I see you
Thank
have a question. Yeah, you're welcome. Ryan, I see you have a question.
Hi.
Hey.
You see me? Hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, Ryan.
Hey, it's Lena Gena Sitanish. You had do a sock Ryan Qualls. You had do a sock Ryan Qualls since na. I come from Elwanu Slam territory and the Duwamish territory where I'm currently at, but I'm a Tlingit native. I identify primarily as, that's my biggest amount of blood. My other is Aztec and mixed European descent. But I'm working on a project with the Earth Law Center for the personhood rights of nature for the Elwha River. And it's so interesting because just the day before today, I don't know if you guys connected or if it was like so synchronous that the IEN, Indigenous Environmental Network, had their personhood rights of nature event yesterday.
Yes, I know. That just happened.
Okay. So I live in Port Angeles, Washington, and I'm also a member of the Black Action Coalition because I feel like unity and environment are, of course, hand in hand in protecting the earth and being part of the earth. We are all indigenous of Mother Earth, and protecting her is important. So one obstacle that I'm having that I've seen in some other areas like California and Maine is that if there's places that have a mill, how do we get community buy-in so that they don't feel like it's going to affect the jobs and economy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've seen that certainly here, and Seldaf have talked about that as an issue. So it comes down to how you write the bill, right? How you write the ordinance. So you can certainly, so as we're rewriting our bill now for this, I don't know, I'm going to say the second time, but that's it, we've rewritten it multiple times. Second major revision of it, and really wanting to add in language that protects communities as well. So that it's not, because it can be misinterpreted as, okay, we're just going to protect the environment and, never mind anyone who might be living there. That's certainly not the intention. So it comes down to how you write the ordinance. And Seldaf, are you working with Seldaf?
With Earth Law Center, Grant?
You're working with Earth Law, yeah. So I'm sure that they can write it in a way that carves out protections for communities that are already there, and you're talking specifically about jobs, it sounds like, and the economic impact of protecting the watershed. So it comes down, I mean, we did all these community meetings and really hearing, like making sure that we'd heard from the community, like what are the concerns here? What would possibly be a barrier? What would get in the way of us creating this protection? Because there's all sorts of things, obviously, that you haven't thought of that other people are going to be like, oh, hey, what about this? And this is a perfect example of that. So it really comes down to collecting that information, really hearing from the community, understanding what the objections might be, and finding a way to write that into the bill so that it protects either communities, it protects housing, and protects jobs if it has to. If that's something that feels like that's important for the community, then that might be a first step, that the mill is sort of carved out, that it's grandfathered in, however you want to put it, that it's still there and people can still work there, but maybe they can then tighten up some of their procedures so that they're creating less pollution or whatever it is that's the challenge, so that you can move more towards protecting the watershed as a whole.
Would that, for community discussion and participation, would that be best done with the City of Port Angeles Council, and then just having like a community public meeting open for that particular topic?
I think, yeah, there's many ways to do it. I mean, if you're the city council are into collaborating on that, then absolutely. Like if they would be part of hosting that or getting that out, information out to people, yes. I think also some people don't want to come and be involved in city council meetings. That is not appealing to them. So having we did community meetings like at all sorts of different neighborhoods around the city, in churches and community centers and places that people already felt comfortable going to and had a relationship with, which I think enabled us to hear from parts of the community that we maybe wouldn't have heard from had we just only gone sort of the city council route. You can also do it online. You can also do surveys. You know, there's so many ways to send out, you know, online surveys, different ways to kind of hear the voices of all the different communities. And working in partnership with people that represent different parts of the community, I think can be really helpful to make sure that you're hearing as many voices as possible.
Thank you. I agree with that. And then I was wanting to, after this, if you know I was successful in this area, I was wanting to try it with the Tongass and the glaciers up in Alaska, because those are my main homelands. And I wanted to make a connection also from the Tongass to the Amazon, you know, being that the Tongass is like the Amazon of North America.
Yes.
And so I've only seen Nina. I think I've messaged her once just about jewelry and bought some really beautiful earrings from her.
Yeah, she's beautiful.
Yeah, they were incredible. Like some of my favorite I've ever seen. I've rarely bought like earrings for anybody, but like hers were like, wow, the colors so beautiful.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I don't know if there's anybody maybe that you would be willing to connect me with. I'm also doing this as like an honors project for my degree, for an honors program. Yeah.
Yes.
If you have any ideas like that's part of the Tongass or part of the Amazon down there.
Right, absolutely. And I'd love to connect you with CELDF. They could certainly help you, and I can connect you with people in Sariaku for sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Sure. And you also raised an interesting point, and Ian, as you were talking earlier about international, you know, ecosystems that cross international borders, this is something I've been thinking too, because we have the French Broad River that goes through Asheville, but it's like this little tiny slice of it. It's this huge river that goes through many states, and to start working towards collaboration so that we can protect an entire bioregion or entire ecosystem that makes sense from the natural world's point of view, rather than just these human lines that we've drawn on a map that really don't have any relationship to the geography of the place. But those kinds of, this is part of why we're doing this, is like to be able to form collaborations with other people who may be far away, but in the same bioregion or the same ecosystem in some way that we're working in.
Can I jump in here, Kat, with a comment? I think so. I'm the program director for Community Roots, and a lot of what doing webinars like this is about as well is building the coalitions, because so much of what I've seen in the chat of what people are trying is where we get really exhausted, and where the system is designed to wait us out. And so building, there was a comment that was put in about we the people have so much power, but the way that things get sort of structured, like the reason we couldn't do what Callie was asking, why can't we do it sooner? It's like they've created these laws to slow us down. And so things like this, you all being here, every single person in this call, it makes a really big difference. You can feel less alone if you feel like you have a group of like 7, and then you get to come on a webinar with 60. It adds some more resilience to your basket to kind of go back in. And so I just want to, all the questions, we often, people would say like, well, you know, if that's not possible, or like, what is possible? And I'm like, well, let's actually keep shooting for what we want, go really big and keep dreaming that large, and then finding the people that are going to really kind of support that vision. And that's that becomes contagious. That's kind of where we all are like, I can hope that much, you know. And it's scary because, again, when we're in our own little individual space, in our own communities, and we can't tell who else cares. So I guess that would be my one other thought to you, Ryan, is, you know, yeah, building these connections with different people, but as everyone's pointing out, you know, the river here isn't unique to here. It's raining in the Amazon, that should matter to me as well. And so as we shift into our next portion, we can often, and this happened a lot, people would get really caught up in the tiny nitty gritty, like, what about this thing? This like one thing I can't figure out. I'm like, all right, well, don't worry about that one thing. Kind of try to see, let's keep going for that big picture. What do you need to find to stay resilient? Because so much of being in the activist seat is, there's all your regular life challenges, and then there's this activism world of like, how do these fit? And there's so many different angles we could take, but again, just being here so that the conversations you have with friends, it's like there's some new wording, hopefully some more energy to put into whichever angle you want to take out of this webinar, you know?
So I want us to,
much.
yeah, thank you for being here. And I saw a question in the chat about resources for K through 12. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I will send you all an email with a bunch of different links, like to CELDF's website, the International Alliance for Rights of Nature. Like, there's a bunch of different organizations where a lot of this information is kind of aggregated, so they may be able to point you towards those sorts of things. But I'd love to give us all a chance to have deeper conversations in smaller groups, because it's often hard when there's 60 people in a room. So Susanna's going to do some technical magic and make us all disappear into there's still people coming in, into various different rooms, probably maybe aim for like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 people in a room. Susanna, if you can sort of figure that out. I know as an introvert, I hate being sent into a room with a bunch of people that I don't know. So I just want to acknowledge that. And if you don't want to be sent into a room with a bunch of people, you don't have to accept it. You can stay here and just hang with me, and we can chat. And that's totally fine. And I encourage you to go meet some new people, and maybe share with each other, like, what's one thing you learned today? What's one thing you have a question about? And maybe as a third topic, what you're thinking about, how do I take this home? What can I like practically do that's going to enable me to do something about this at home? So what did you learn? What's a question you have? How are you taking this home? We're going to do 20 minutes or so, and then come back together. And so maybe before you end, designate one person to be a spokesperson who can then report back to the full group. So that way we all get to hear a little bit of each of the conversations. And so if there's any questions that you weren't able to answer amongst yourself, Susanna and I can do what we can. And we'd love to hear, like, what are your thoughts for how can you take this home, or what more do you need? And I believe, Susanna, if we can figure this out, that while you're in your breakout rooms, you can call us. You should be able to contact us. So if you want one of us to pop in and answer a question, we can do that. So we'll come back at about, we've got 4:22 now, so maybe at 4:40, 4:45, we'll come back together.
Sweetgrass, if any of you read it.
It's beautiful, I love it.
Oh, what a good book.
Yeah.
But that talking about the rivers and the water and the forests all being persons, but in her language, the native language, it was actually a verb.
Mhm.
Like to be the bay, to be the forest, as it's the process of happening. And it's hard to even have that concept because we've got so many concepts of things and objects instead of beingness.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Joy, for those of you who just joined, Joy was talking about braiding sweet grass and Robin Wall Kilmer. Yes, and the concept of verbs and nouns, and that we tend to label rivers a noun. A river is a noun, but in Robin's native language, I don't remember initially, I think, is it's a verb. It's a state of being. A different way of looking at the world. All right, is everybody back?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we have a little bit of time here. I know Susanna's collected some questions that were previously put into the chat. So she's going to do some magic balancing act between those questions and then any questions that you are coming back from your breakout groups with. So let's see if anyone does have a question, either put up your Zoom hand or your physical hand so we can see if anyone's got a question or if there are just comments or pieces of your conversation that you'd like to share with the wider group. We'd love to hear those too. Suzanne, I'm going to leave it to you to kind of pick people, if that's okay.
Mage has got her hand up.
Hi, I'm Madge Monser, and I'm from outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In our group, we had Michaela and Callie. Callie's from Asheville, and Michaela is from North Carolina along the coast. We talked about a couple of different issues that we have in our communities, stormwater here in Pennsylvania, issues with trees in Asheville, and building on wetlands along the Carolina coast. And one of the things that I think all three of us could agree on is that one of the biggest issues that appears to be out there is enforcement. While you may have ordinances in place, the ones that are in place, there's a lack of enforcement. Developers have deep pockets and are very adept at figuring out what the loopholes are so that they can get around them. And their deep pockets allow them to kind of push their way in and buy their way into communities to, do essentially what they, get their way, so to speak, at the expense of community, the larger community organization and what's best for them. So I think at the end of the day, we realize that enforcement is a really big issue, and how do we address that with our communities?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. There is always a section in all of the Bills of Rights. The last section is enforcement, and they list. So for the Bill of Rights we wrote for Asheville, I think it's $10,000 a day as the fine for the city. If there's if it's broken in some way, the city gets fined $10,000 a day, which is there to incentivize the city to enforce the ordinance, obviously. So yeah, writing that into your ordinance is a crucial part of it. Yeah, thank you for that. Other report backs or questions?
I can report back for our group. I'm Phyllis Stiles from Asheville, and I was joined in our group by Stephen Hendricks of Asheville and Charlotte Owens of Columbus, Ohio. And so I'm real anxious to read the Bill of Rights for Asheville. I haven't seen it yet. And I'm just so happy that you all are based here. Charlotte was telling us about what's been going on in Columbus, Ohio area as they've been banding together to try to get an ordinance or some kind of law passed to stop fracking and stop fracking waste coming into their community. And so they've been working on a community Bill of Rights with Steldith for several years. They've had multiple attempts to be successful, and they're not giving up. And so that was fascinating because we're really lucky that right here in our own backyards, we don't have to worry about fracking. And so I just can't even begin to imagine what that must be like. And so for us, we are really involved, Stephen and I, with Greenworks Urban Canopy effort, and certainly want to do everything we can to restore our urban canopy and sustain the canopy that we already have, and are excited to support the work that you all are doing, Kat and Seldiff, to make things better in Asheville. So I hope I represented our group well. We just mostly had a really nice conversation.
Good. And that's a big part of this, is connecting with each other. I did just post a link to the current Bill of Rights for Asheville, so you can all see that. We are in the process of making some additions for the second round. This will be the second time we've run it to try and get it on the ballot, which will include, Phyllis, you'll be happy to know, something, we haven't quite figured out what the language is, but protection of the urban forests, and something that restricts development, because as you know, we have an overabundance of hotels and apartment complexes.
Yeah.
Working on that. Yeah. Any other reports, questions, comments? Yeah. Chuck.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just want to first say thank you for the TED Talk. I watched it 3 times now. I cried each time, both in tears of joy and tears of sadness. But I've spent the last, I'm the one that's been inundating you with all the quotes about grassroots organizing, the power of citizenship. I spent about 40 years working on human rights issues. And one thing that I found early on was what you found out about human disconnect from the environment. We have been disconnected from our citizenship. And it's to the degree that we have done that, we have castrated ourselves in terms of our power. And following that is the thought that we can't make a difference because we try and the system seems to be rigged against us to do so, but it works. I'm telling you, it has worked on federal issues, and on city issues, it's like shooting fish in a barrel if you get enough people together. And it's how you do it, meaning loving with kindness that makes it happen. But one of the projects that I just stumbled into, I was with Denise, and Denise and I both were here in Washington working on pandemic preparedness and warnings before the pandemic. And so the great thing about the pandemic, 2 great things. One, we don't have to worry about it anymore. We don't have to warn people about it anymore. And then the second thing is the momentum that has been growing around climate change, and people are looking for something. The pandemic forced people to look for something outside of that. And so it's providing this energy or this opening for people to get involved, to go outside, to be in nature. And what I stumbled on, before all this happened, I gave up on global issues and I started on local issues. So my daughter introduced me to weed warrioring, which is removing invasive species. And that I found out it was mission impossible. We're going to get our butts kicked. So it just became a workout program. And it got so good at it that the city invited us to come in and do it at the city level. And now we've got a group of about 500 people who will get together and go out on weekends. We had about 120 people on Martin Luther King Day. Go out and one park. We got 65 parks to denude of invasives. But then that started us looking at natives, and then saving the native plants. And now we're working on a city resolution to create corridors within our city between parks with people's houses growing native plants. And what we're discovering there is the way that it connects a community. Well, people you've never met before who are interested, oh, I've got some of these plants, I'll share with you. I got some seeds, so it's building a network of community, but also my covert reason is building a database of people who are willing to fight on environmental issues. And so right now it's upwards of about 800 people in our community that are organized politically now. They don't know it yet, but we actually did save one park. It was a golf course that was 144 acres of golf course that is now a park. So we did mobilize around that and got about 300 people out of that. So anyway, we're growing a grassroots movement here, and it's just, it is infectious, whether it's removing invasive species or planting native species, but it's right outside your front door that gets you connected to nature. Being in the dirt helps your immune system. It gets you outside. It's all these pluses and no negatives. It's save money by growing, gardens instead of yards. Anyway, it's just, it's got all these pluses to it. So, yeah, I can stop there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Chuck. I love that. Yes, we can make a difference, and we are making a difference. And it's just like, yes, we got to do it. We got to write those local laws. I love the native plants idea. I see Callie over there, and I'm sure Susan somewhere in Asheville is taking note of that as part of the Grow Wise. We have a serious kudzu problem here, so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Pat, I hope you can put in the Bill of Rights that all the developments, the apartment complexes and things like that, instead of planting grass, that they must plant native plants. It's cheaper. It's cheaper to the developers. I mean, that's a win-win, you know? And they get butterflies flying around. But that'd be awesome if that could be put in the climate.
No more grass. Yeah. I am aware that we are coming to the end of our time here, and I want to respect your time. I know you've all got busy lives. I see a request in here to people to network together, and I've had requests for various different resources. So I'm wondering about the best way to do that. I'm wondering, Susanna, maybe you could help me about creating a shared document that I could give you all access to. And then if you wanted to add your contact information to that, you could, so that you can opt out of that if you don't want to do that. And I could also put all the links and all the resources that I've been thinking about in that document. Would that work? Susanna, do you think?
Yeah, so I think the key piece there would be that y'all would, you would opt in or opt out. So I don't want to try to collect your information here. We will send you a follow-up link with resources. And if you would like to network with each other, you will have to take that action step. Because there's already some people who had to leave the call, and I don't want to leave them out as well of the networking. And we'll do more things like this as well. So stay connected to us. I think just building that partnership, like I was sharing before we split into smaller groups, it's a place to sort of reboot when you can recognize that efforts like this are happening in different towns and cities and countries. It's a place to be re-energized.
So as I know there's probably still thoughts and comments, but I do want to honor everyone's time. So as a way to check out, I'd love to hear as many voices as possible. Just a word or two about how you're feeling in this moment. So I'm going to offer 2 words, which is connected and inspired. And I invite you to just unmute yourself and just share a word.
Optimistic and hopeful.
Grateful.
Cheered. Cheered up.
Rejuvenated.
Passionate and determined.
Hopeful.
Determined.
Energized.
Appreciative.
Connected.
Nice.
Who of us said connected at the same time?
Wow.
Potentiated. I think I made that one up.
Oh, that's a good one.
Beautiful. Well, thank you all. So grateful to see your faces, hear your voices. Know that we're not doing this alone. Sometimes it feels like we're doing it in a bubble. Really good to know that you're all out there thinking about this and working on it. And now I feel like I've got a lot more allies, and I'm very much looking forward to being in touch with all of you. And Susanna and I are available. We will put that information in the document. We'll also put our contact information in, and I'd love to hear from you. If there's any way we can help seed some rights of nature work in other communities across the country or internationally, we'd be delighted to do that.
Thank you both. Thank you both so much. And thank you, Tyler, for helping to put this container together as well.
Yes.
Thank you all for being here.
Susanna, do you have
Thank
some?
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. We'll do more. Go well, my friends.
Thank you.